So today we are hosting a panel on how can Christians engage well in the public square. With the 24-hour news cycle, social media, and increasing division in our nation, the public square can feel toxic and dangerous. And for many of us who are professors or work on the college campus, it feels like that's an extra fraught place. So what is the call of Jesus for those who follow him and how to engage well in the public square? What is the good news we're called to speak about in this fractured time when cancel culture reigns supreme? Well, we have three amazing panelists who will be having a conversation with us about this. And let me introduce them now. So Michael Weir is a leading strategist, speaker, and practitioner at the intersection of faith, politics, and public life. He has advised the president, as well as some of the nation's leading foundations, nonprofits, and public leaders on some of the thorniest issues and exciting opportunities that define American life today. He has argued that the spiritual health and civic character of individuals is deeply tied to the state of our politics and public affairs. Andra Gillespie is a political science at Emory University. She teaches and researches in African-American politics, particularly the politics of the post-civil rights generation of leadership and political participation. You can often hear her being interviewed on NPR, and that is one of my joys ever since I met Andra. I'll be driving along and I'll be like, there's Andra, I'm hearing my friend. So now all of you guys can say it when you hear Andra. And Peter Wehner is an in-residence senior fellow at the Trinity Forum, a contributing opinion writer for the New York Times and a contributing editor for The Atlantic magazine. He has written for numerous other publications, including Time Magazine, The Wall Street Journal, The Washington Post, Financial Times, The Weekly Standard, National Review, Commentary, National Affairs, and Christianity Today. He has also appeared frequently as a commentator on MSNBC, CNN, Fox News, CBS, PBS, and C-SPAN television. So what have you not been on, Michael, on Peter? So we are so happy to have you, and we will be beginning the panel. So Nate, can you put us all on the screen? And just wanted to check with you, Nate, that the recording is happening right now. Okay, good. So Pete, Andra, Michael, what is the public square? And what is your public square? And why do you think it's important for Christians to engage in the public square? If you could each briefly introduce yourself through answering that question. And I'll ask Andra to go first.
Sure, thank you. And thank you for having me. I see the public square as an extension of the classroom, really. So I am definitely speaking from my position as a professor. I see what I'm doing is doing something that's not dissimilar from what I'm doing in my introductory American politics class. I'm just doing it for a wider audience. And I think it's particularly important right now, given the work that I do in the field that I'm in, to explain things to an audience where we aren't sure, and we're pretty convinced that civic education is on the decline and civic knowledge is actually pretty low. So I see it sort of as an extension of my service to be able to do the things that I do at my elite college and then extend that out into the wider community so that they get the benefit of the things that my colleagues and I are studying and researching.
Great, thank you. Michael.
Yeah, sure. So well, first, I'm just Ivy means so much to me, and so glad to be here, and just want to thank all of you for your ministry and the work that you do every day. Ivy helped me get through college and stay out of trouble, and continues to this day to just be such a tremendous resource through all the people you've blessed and helped shape. The public square for me is anytime you act when strangers can hear you. The public square is conduct that is publicly available, available to those who you do not know. And so I think it's includes politics, but is not summarized by or constituted solely of politics. I like thinking of the classroom as and sort of the academy as having public elements, the arts. I'm really touched by all of the ways in which sort of private virtues have analogs in public. And so a lot of folks are familiar with, Cornel West saying that justice is what love looks like in public. I've described civility as what grace looks like in public, and I think that there is a way of transmuting sort of interpersonal virtues in public life. And I think and then just the other thing I'd say is that public life is the space to which Christians are called by Jesus, that there's a clear public call, a call out from just the confines of our intimate relationships, to serve, share knowledge with, testify and witness to, and be among the public. And so that's what I'd say.
Thanks, Michael. Pete.
Yeah, first, thanks, echoing what Michael and Andra said, to InterVarsity to be with you. It's a terrific institution. I was talking to my daughter about it earlier today, and a lot of my favorite people in life have been associated with InterVarsity, and it really does have a terrific ministry in a time when ministry isn't as easy maybe as it has been in the past. And so there are a lot of choppy waters to navigate for a lot of people, including ministries, and Ivy's done it really, really well. Yeah, the public square. I mean, the public square is public. That's one thing. It's just not a private conversation. And I think about it as a place where people of various size to audiences of various size speak and argue and debate and persuade and listen to one another and speak to each other, and where emotions are expressed and deep convictions are articulated. Once in a while, minds are changed. But it's a place in which sensibilities are formed too. The sensibilities of individuals, sensibilities of communities, sensibilities of a country. So the public square matters a lot. I think when the public square is healthy, it can help encourage people in their journeys. And I think when the public square is in a bad place, it can pull people down, even wound people. I think in terms of Christians and what their obligations are, or why should they engage in the public square, there are all sorts of reasons. But I think one part of it is that if you have something, maybe two elements to it. One is if you feel deep in your heart that there are things to share, truths to share, experiences to share, things that you want to impart to other people, to help them to see things better than they might see, or to feel things more deeply than they might feel them. The public square is one way to do it. The other thing, which I think gets less attention these days, is the public square is a place to listen to other people, to listen to their story, their experience, what it is that people who come at life from a different angle of vision have to teach us. Because everybody has blind spots, and the public square is one of the places where you can learn, if you're open to it, to seeing what blind spots you have, how you might need to recalibrate some of your thinking, and some of your own expressions. And then the last thing I'd say is the public square. The implication is that it's about words, and I think words matter a huge amount. I think words have the capacity to stir and uplift the human heart. Everybody knows the power of words, whether it's words from a loved one, whether it's words from a letter, words from a poem, words from a song. those things can move us, and words can wound, and they can pull us down, and they can degrade. And I think everybody knows that on some level. I think everyone should care about words and the power of words, but I think Christians in particular have an obligation because in part because of the first chapter of John.
Thank you. All three of you have quite a lot of opportunity, at least compared to someone like me, to be in the public square and to speak into it. So would you tell us about a time you thought you did well in engaging the public square? And then tell us about a time that you didn't do as well, or maybe even failed, and what you learned from that.
So I'll go. So I'll do the bad one first. It was 2013. I was on an MSNBC show. So like it was fine for MSNBC, but I think in the light of civility and grace, it was fine. I was referring to King Cuccinelli, who was then Attorney General in Virginia. He was head of, I can't remember if he was head of ICE under the Trump administration. And I disagree with this politics. And so in that space, being a wit is kind of helpful, but like I sort of referred to him as Cucci-Coo, sort of looking at sort of playing on his name in a way that was really insensitive. And like I said, nobody on MSNBC cared, but I thought about it later and I got convicted, and it was something where I kind of had to tweet out, okay, that was wrong. I shouldn't have done that. And, you know, this is not somebody who I know personally, but it's still really important for me to, as a Christian, to remember to like devolve to name calling is just not an appropriate thing. You know, I think one time that I am proud of was I had the opportunity to do the election night coverage for PBS in 2016. And that was an interesting night, to say the least. So we were on air well into the wee hours of the morning, and it was interesting to watch as we saw the, you know, results come in. And it started to become clear that Donald Trump was going to be president of the United States, to kind of watch how people were reacting kind of like, you know, on the panel to that. And I was preternaturally calm during that thing. And I've had other sort of events in my life where I knew that it was the peace of God that passed all understanding. So I wouldn't quite say it was quite at that level, but I think God was kind of in control. And people kind of asked me later, how could you like keep a straight face? I was like, it was my job. I'm also supposed to be dispassionate here. I'm the academic voice. I'm not the partisan voice here, right? So I'm not to express emotion about sort of like which side I'm on in this particular situation. And so I saw it as a kind of a professional obligation to kind of maintain composure and keep my cool. And, you know, even though the next day I kind of had some surreal out of body moments where I realized that, oh, that election really did happen yesterday. Like I woke up the next day and thought I was in Groundhog Day in the Bill Murray movie, and then woke up to the reality that no, I'm not on Groundhog Day. And so you kind of have to move forward with that. But that's the kind of moment that I model for. And I see that as particularly sort of important in a really partisan media environment. My job as the political scientist, as the analyst, is to actually be pretty dispassionate. And even though sometimes when things get really crazy and sometimes you have to call somebody out, I'm not doing it in a partisan way. And so, you know, I'm very thankful that I was able to keep my cool and keep it together and model something for at least my friends who are watching me.
Thanks, Andra.
Yeah, so I thought about this question, and my main thought was, you know, sort of worst and best sort of examples in the public square. There are some sort of common ways that those could be judged, right? You know, sort of article that got the most clicks, or you know, you got canceled on Twitter, maybe not the best thing. But I think the most important thing for folks to think about is, you know, context really matters. And sometimes the same expression from a different person has different meaning, is in effect like a less successful, or I prefer to think in sort of terms of faithfulness. There are things that I've written or answers to Q&As that I've given that went over really well, and I left and I thought, I think they liked it for the wrong reason. I'm not sure that even though they're super happy with the answer I gave, I didn't communicate exactly what I wanted to communicate. And one example is I did a series of talks on civility and polarization. And when I started doing these talks, I noticed when I left, I'd have one or two people come up to me following the event and say something along the lines of, you're so right. The other side really is bad. And you start going, oh, you completely missed it. You liked my talk for the exact opposite reason. The whole reason I'm giving the talk is for you to have introspection on yourself, not for you to take away ammunition for the other side. That's kind of missing the point. And then there are other times where I've said things and written things that, so one example is Congresswoman, when Trump took office, called for at an event for impeaching and she used a vulgarity to describe Trump, and I wrote an op-ed for the Post about the way that vulgarity and a politics of anger and contempt is inconsistent with and undermines a politics of the common good. That actually, when we use contemptuous language, it actually provides the fuel for contemptuous policies. So even though this congresswoman was thinking that she was opposing what she viewed to be contemptuous policies of Trump, I made the argument that no, actually it's that kind of rhetoric which actually is fuel to the fire of the very policies that you want to be speaking out against. And people hated that op-ed. I mean, just kind of to Andra's point, according to the mood of the moment, sort of just as Trump was taking office in 2016 was not the time to be, according to sort of popular sentiment, was not the time to be making a criticism of a Democratic congresswoman, especially not on Twitter or sort of mainstream folks. But I wrote that op-ed. I stand by it today. I think it was a message folks had to hear. I think what I wrote was proved out over time. But I had to turn off social media for a few days because people were just absolutely. But one of the least well-received things I've written is one of the things that I feel like was most faithful and most sort of successful, if you want to use that kind of language. Yeah.
Pete?
Yeah, I think starting with things that maybe I regret more than others. I'd say as a general matter, probably looking to where I was 10, 15 years ago versus where I am now as a writer. I think I did. There was too much confirmation bias in my writing, and I was writing too much as a political tribalist, sort of for my side. And I didn't really sense that then, or at least didn't sense it enough then. I think I see it more now. I think more recently I did a piece. It was in the context of Donald Trump Jr. Using the scriptures to essentially validate what I thought was a pretty brutal form of politics, which bothers me a lot. And I did a piece critical of him. I don't really, for the most part, have any regrets about the piece I wrote, except I did have a line in the first paragraph where I said that if Donald Trump Jr. has any redeeming qualities in his life, he's done a nice job hiding them. And that I'm not sure that's whether that's true or not. I'm not sure it was the right tone. Usually when I write, I ask myself, because of the nature of the kind of writing I do and the world that I'm in, I try and ask myself, are there lines that I'm crossing here? And then I try and think of people who have been role models in my life, or who are role models in my life, and then I try and ask myself, what would they think about what I've written? And Steve Wehner, who used to be president of the university, is one of those people. So that's one of the checks that I try and have, but I have it imperfect. I'd say on the plus side, you write something that you think has touched somebody's heart, somebody's mind or somebody's heart, but probably the heart more. I've done probably 12 to 15 meditations on Christian meditations for the New York Times, not on the intersection of faith and politics, but just on faith. Those are probably the most meaningful things to me. And I did one, Where is God in the Midst of Pain? And that was meaningful to me because I heard from so many people, Christian and non-Christian afterward, who shared their stories with me about pain that they'd gone through and experienced, the suicide of loved ones, the death of people. And I felt like that piece, for whatever combination of reasons, seemed to reach people. And they felt comfortable enough in opening up to me as a stranger to share their story. So I think when that happens, you have a sense, obviously, that I would think about it now. It's several years since I wrote that piece, but that was one in which I felt like, that was one I was glad to have done. When you write in politics, as I do, Michael does, others do, sometimes you write really good pieces and sometimes they're not so good, but the question is, how long did they last? It's one of the challenges in writing about politics is, can you speak to the moment in a way that has some deeper meaning and purpose? But a lot of times political events, political moments are ephemeral, and so are the pieces that you write on them. And so you try and think through, are there things that you've written or said that last with people and that encourage people in some way?
Well, thanks for all sharing some of the vulnerable parts of your own journey. I'm noting that a lot of what you all have talked about is how you talk and how you treat others in the conversation. I wonder about but Pete, you just alluded to the actual topic of what you talk about. What do you think it's important for Christians to speak up about? What would you like sincere followers of Jesus to voice more often in the public square? And what do you wish we would shut up about?
I'll jump in and just say, I think, Richard Niebuhr's Christ and Culture is meaningful to me because of the ways in which I think of, a number of, I think, leading lights, whether it's Richard Foster or this idea that there are in the public realm, particularly in politics, which is penultimate and prudential, that there is no single faithfulness that applies to people in a way that transcends context, role, etc. There's a C.S. Lewis essay where he's considering the creation of a Christian political party, and he writes something. An essay is called "Meditations on the Third Commandment," and there's a part of that essay where he basically says, one of the greatest temptations when you combine faith and politics is to proclaim God hath said when he hasn't spoken. It's to sort of use religious authority to dogmatize a narrow political approach. Now, I think that we actually need to be more forthright about directly applying and presenting Christian knowledge, as publicly available knowledge. I think that's central right now. And those of you who are in ministry, I think, Willard would call you spokespeople for Christ. Actually, he'd call all of us on this call spokespeople for Christ. And this bringing of knowledge is just very central to the role of the public-oriented Christian. But I'm very wary about saying, oh, Christians shouldn't be talking about this issue. We should be talking about that. I think God has given us all experiences and communities from which we speak, and sort of specialized knowledge. The body has many parts, and it's actually my confidence lies in Christians being faithful in the way that God has called them, and the sum of that transcending any sort of thoughts I might have about directional aims of our politics, or, oh gosh, if this issue was at the center of the Christian witness, wouldn't we all be better off? And I'm not sure if I can be certain about those kinds of judgments. I am really certain about people who have hearts and minds that are pursuing the Lord, and that there's a public overflow to that will lead to something that's better for the church and better for the public.
Andra, you want to go?
Well, I kind of want to go last, if that's okay on this one.
Okay, sure.
Sure, yeah. Happy to do it. Yeah, I mean, in some ways, I'm going to echo Michael. In terms of why is it important to, or what do you think is important for Christians to speak up about? I mean, some of that I think just depends on facts and circumstances and individuals. I think sometimes people are positioned or called to be persuasive, and sometimes maybe more prophetic. Some of it depends on who the individual is. Some of it depends on what community you're part of, and what are you equipped to do and what aren't you equipped to do. So I try and stay away from thinking Christians should do X or Y. It's tricky enough for me to figure out what I should do as a Christian, let alone try and tell what other people should do. I think there are kind of rules for the road, which are pretty obvious ones. One should speak truthfully and honestly. One should, if you're talking about this sort of domain or realm, speak up for justice. One should conduct oneself in a way that would make, that Christ would look down and say, if not exactly well done, at least not offensively transgressed, those lines. What would I like sincere followers of Jesus to voice in the public square more often, and what do I wish that they would shut up about? I guess I would frame it this way. I was thinking about a month or so ago of the public witness of the evangelical church to the wider world. And it struck me that there are scandals that have either crippled or struck at the heart of several important evangelical or Christian institutions. The largest Protestant denomination in the country, the Southern Baptist Convention, has been roiled by sexual abuse scandals, both ones that have been committed, and then the follow-up, the cover-up. Then you have one of the largest apologetic ministries in the world, Ravi Zacharias. Again, a horrible, wicked story of abuse and cover-up. One of the largest Christian camps in the country, Kanakuk, again, sexual abuse, again, cover-up. One of the largest Christian universities in the world, Liberty. Jerry Falwell Jr., the president, had to resign because of misconduct and a whole sort of tonal approach. Hillsong, not the group per se, but the churches that are part, again, seized by scandal. Those are huge, huge blows. That's tremendous damage to the public witness. It's tremendous damage to individual lives, people who were entrusted and cared and were to care for these people in the name of Christ, these institutions and individuals stood and they did awful acts. So what is that? In light of that, I think a little more self-reflection and a little more lament and a little less instructing the rest of the world on their moral failures and what they ought to do and how they ought to live would probably go a long way toward helping the situation. I think lament is itself something that's important and called for. And I think in terms of the witness to the wider world, to be able to say, we recognize our failures, we recognize our mistakes, and they've hurt people and they're deeply regrettable, and we're going to try and do something about it, would be a lot better than a kind of cultural aggression project that never acknowledges that. And I honestly wish more influential figures within the Christian church would spend a little more time honestly speaking to our failures rather than simply pointing to the failures of secular modernity, even though I think there are failures with secular modernity, and they deserve to be called out. And then the last thing is what Michael said. I think when you weaponize faith for partisan purposes, you use it as a club, you subordinate faith to pre-existing cultural or political or partisan agendas, and you whack people in the name of Christ. I think that's a problem, and it's contrary to the Sermon on the Mount, I would say, along with a lot of other verses, and certainly the tone and the tenor and the arc of Jesus's life and the Scripture itself.
Yeah, I mean, I think what I'm going to say is going to complement what Michael and Peter have said. If I had to sum it up in one word, I don't want Christians to shut up and not be involved in the public square in any aspect or facet of it. But the thing that I think is missing is love. And the reason why it's missing, and I'm not talking about some kind of like touchy-feely, we're going to get God to co-sign everything that people want to do for their self-actualization, even if it's wrong type of situation. I very much want to adhere to orthodoxy on this in terms of how we live out our lives. But what I see in the church right now, writ large in the United States, is pride and a lust for power that's manifesting itself politically, in terms of being able to, willing to cut deals with people with whom people should not be, Christians shouldn't be cutting deals with at all, in order to maintain power. I mean, it's one thing to understand that you're working in a pluralistic society and you got to work with all different kinds of people, but like literally making Faustian bargains that you can't get out of, and that don't allow you to actually sometimes concede when your opponents may actually have a point, or when you have, or your side has done wrong, I think it's problematic. And I think it's actually hamstringing our witness. And I think about every horrible thing that happens all the time. And these are places where the body could actually be in a position to provide help. And then people could ask, why are you doing this? Or like, what is the reason for the hope that you have? And I just don't think we have the credibility to be able to say that a lot. I think there are a lot of debates that we can enter in on, but because some of us have chosen to very publicly kind of double down on stupid and extremist types of things, I just think it undermines our witness. And I don't think that it speaks to Christ. My mom always jokes that Jesus has bad PR, and that's a sort of kind of running sort of like, theme in many of our conversations of late here. And so to the extent that I want people to shut up, it's not that I want to, exclude people from conversations, but it's people have acted in bad faith and they've kind of lost the authority to be credible. And that's when I want them to shut up. It's not that I don't think that Christians don't have a thing to say about things. And I think even sometimes some of the issues that we embrace, even if we may be technically right in terms of what Scripture says, right, the way in which we've gone about doing it, the reasons for which we've gone about doing it have been all wrong. And that's really transparent. And so because of that, like the world is calling foul, and we're not being persecuted, right, for the sake of Christ. We're being buffeted for our own foolishness. And this is one of those times where we need to to just sort of really be humble and really acknowledge the ways in which we've screwed up. And I think the hard thing about this is that some people will call this cancellation. No, sometimes cancellation is you messed up and you kind of need to sit down and be quiet for a while. And sometimes some of the things you've done have gone so far that you've lost public trust that people are probably never going to trust you in a position of leadership and power again. But people who are so attuned to being in power and to feeling like they're being in charge don't know how to deal with that. And so then they cry discrimination and victimhood when they really haven't lost power at all. And so that's the thing that I find troubling. And as a Christian, I mourn the fact that I'm more annoyed with people who are my brothers and sisters in Christ than with people who I know are not operating sort of under the supposed guidance and control of the Holy Spirit. Because that's the other thing. I'm like, if you're a Christian, right, I see no fruit of this. And so I think there has to be a space for people to kind of call out, your discipleship sucked right now, right? Especially some people who like claim other people. I think it's important for us to be like, that person discipled you. That's probably not the right church for you to go to, right? Because that's what their discipleship kind of points out, right? That's not speaking well to what their methods are, or to whether or not it's actually being controlled by the Holy Spirit.
I'd just like to note, I so far have 2 future book titles. Your Discipleship Sucks, and I appreciate Pete giving us Whack Someone for Christ. So that's 2 book titles, and we still have 20 minutes left. So my book agent's going to be very, very thrilled. Yeah.
Well, I'd like to take a little time to think about the campus. It's its own sort of public square, a microcosm of all that's going on in our nation. And many professors, some of whom are on this Zoom call, feel the pressure around students and colleagues reacting to what they say or write if it doesn't hew to some sort of party line. And sometimes people feel like maybe they shouldn't say anything at all because they're going to get canceled. What's your best advice for the ways that professors can or should engage?
I'll start first, just as a professor on the panel. That's hard. Sometimes you do ask sort of whether or not every academic fad sort of, comports to the image of Christ and whether you should be jumping on bandwagons. And I often think about, even if there are things that I disagree with, I need to know about them. And so I pretty much have this sort of open, I can study anything and I'm curious about lots of different things, and that doesn't necessarily reflect on my faith. Most of the time, I don't feel a conflict, even though I work in spaces that would kind of be sort of characterized as being exceedingly liberal. And on subject areas where the party line tends to be liberal, there are certain things that I have seen some people do that I may disagree with, but that's usually more how they do things. The question about empiricism usually is the same, and we often tend to kind of agree that if you're asking a question, if your methods make sense, and you can walk people through how you reached a conclusion, not that I sort of think that objectivity is sacrosanct, and I certainly sort of bring the lens of problematizing that sort of from a gendered and a racial lens, but there is some commonality that we can talk to about that. Most of the time, like when I'm worried about sort of being beset, it's not necessarily as a Christian. I probably am more likely to feel it politically in this particular moment as a Black person who studies race, and trying to explain to people that, we don't teach critical race theory in like kindergarten through 12th grade. But yes, your college student is old enough to, be taught things like slavery was the cause of the Civil War, and that there is such a thing as systemic racism. We'll explain what we're talking about when we mean that. So I don't have that particular type of conflict. There are times when, for instance, like when we teach about the First Amendment, in my intro American class, where I have to tell people, right, respect is one thing. Not everybody's going to agree with you on everything. Not everybody can affirm sort of any and everything you do. And you're just going to have to, that's part of being an adult. And I see, and that message I think has been pretty well received. So I just, I think some of the things that some people talk about, while they're real, and there are some aspects of cancel culture that I am very concerned about. I think some of this is manufactured grievance, right, of people who actually have a lot of power, who just are not really inclined to share it. and are inclined to not be reflective of sometimes the ways when people challenge you on some of the things that you might be saying. So I do want to be respectful of the ways that like this is in fact real and it does hurt people. But I think there are a lot of times people sort of deploy that and like they actually really shouldn't be doing that.
Michael, would you like to go?
Yeah, sure. I'll just say, I think it's just so, I think it's so valuable for, especially at sort of in a public university, for Christian students and others to see people of intellect, people in scholarship who did not treat faith as a parochial folkway, but can and do again speak of the Christian faith as a source of knowledge that's publicly available. And some of the most important sort of figures in my life are people who have done that. And it's what the public so desperately needs right now. And it's folks who are in scholarship. You carry your willingness to do that in ways that are appropriate and in line with sort of your responsibilities. That means a great deal right now. And I speak with a number of faculty members that are often sort of presented with opportunities to speak to certain issues or be on certain panels or advise certain students. And I think there are very legitimate concerns about, well, if I do this, is it gonna hurt me in my field? Is it going to hamstring me in some way? Will I no longer be viewed as a sort of objective, someone who's just following the truth wherever it leads? Well, no, Christians ought to be known as the people who are most comfortable with reality, whatever it is. Reality is where Jesus is. It's other folks that we want to hold hands with and stare at reality together with. And so I'd encourage you, again, everyone has different circumstances, but to the extent that you're able to offer a model of someone who is intellectually rigorous, someone who loves the Lord with all of your heart, all of your soul, yes, but your mind too. That's a really essential thing in this particular moment.
Yeah, I'd say a couple of things about this, and because I'm not an academic, it's not the world that I know best. I have friends who are academics and talk to students too, so I think I have a feel for what's going on. But again, it depends on what specific institution you're talking about. And I'd say as a general matter, and I'm sure this is partly an experience of my own life, by and large, there's some caveats to this, but the idea that the academy is a place where you cannot engage in an honest set of debates and differences, and that to the degree that students are feeling that they're either being shielded from or shielding themselves from different points of view, I think that's a big loss. And I've talked to students about it, my own daughter about it. What struck me about the conversations with her is the self-censorship that's going on. Actually, it's not this censorship from the other institutions, but it's the sense of what will happen to a student from other students to have any kind of thought or even in some respects questions that are outside of the party line. And I think it's a big loss. I think it's a big loss primarily for the students. And it's partly because in my own life, it's been really valuable to have people to challenge my views. It's not always the most uncomfortable thing in the world. But unless you think that you have arrived at some apex where you know the truth and all truth, and there's really nothing to be refined, nothing more to be learned, then, hopefully that kind of back and forth is going to be helpful, even though sometimes it can be painful. And everybody recognizes that we have concentric circles. And if you feel like there's something at the core of that concentric circle that's being challenged or under attack, like most of us, we're gonna push back. So that's just a general statement. I mean, I try and be sensitive. If you're a professor, you got waters to navigate, landmines to walk through that I don't. They exist for me. They exist for most people who speak in public life. But I'm appreciative of the fact that there are tripwires for different people. And you may think, look, I don't want my career to blow up for the sake of X issue. I think I can avoid that or keep my mouth shut. And I want to be appreciative of that complexity. I would say that in terms of advice on how to speak in these tumultuous times, to do it with care, to some degree, with some degree of understanding too. In my exchanges with students, and I have a fair amount of them, there tend not to be many issues that I shy away from if it seems appropriate or if I'm asked about them, including the hot button issues. Just the other week, I was speaking to some students from the University of Texas system, and there were issues about human sexuality and homosexuality and abortion. And I was completely comfortable in talking to people. I remember there was one student who said, I think that people on the transgender issue, if they hold a position, she was being very forthcoming. She said, I feel like if they have a view different than mine, that they're immoral, and I don't really want to deal with them. And what do you have to say to that? And so we had a really good conversation about that. I think if people feel like you can give voice to different views, you can explain the reason and rationale for your own views, and you can demonstrate some understanding for people who hold views different than yours, including the ability simply to articulate in a fair-minded way what a view is that's different than yours. I think that is helpful. And I think when you can get through that, you can have meaningful conversations with people. I did a visiting fellowship at Duke for a year. And one of my assignments was to ask the Duke students, this is about, I think, 12 to 15, to write the strongest paper that they could on a topic, and that they had to write the paper, the paper had to defend the view that they disagreed with. And the issues that I gave them were abortion, guns, race, and homosexuality. I was actually warned not to do it, but I went ahead and did it anyway. And it was a really, really good exercise. I remember in particular, I remember a lot of the exchanges, but there was one woman who was the campus representative at Duke for NARAL, and she wrote her paper as a so-called pro-life position. And she's talked about how hard it was to do, and she was glad she did it. Nobody changed their mind on their issue, but a number of people were willing to say, to one degree or another, I think I can see the germ of an argument, or I can see a rationale for holding a position different than mine. And what that does is it changes a public debate. So when people disagree with you, it pulls them out of the mindset that says you're wrong on the issue and you're wicked, to you're wrong on the issue and you have a different point of view or a different experience. So when you can do that, I think that's useful. But again, I think it's tough, and I think the American Academy is probably tougher terrain than any other today.
Thank you. Well, I'm gonna get to ask the question I never got to ask in any of these other panels in a minute or, minute and a half. All three of you are in the public eye and have some access to power and to prestige and privilege. So what spiritual disciplines or practices keep you steady in this road? One of the central attributes of St. Francis was the joy that he expressed in the midst of suffering, and all of you are dealing in the nexus of really hard issues. And so would love to hear a little bit about, are there spiritual disciplines that help you keep between the ditches? And as you engage in the public square, is there any way that God has really given you joy?
So I think I find joy in vocation. Being an academic is hard. I think every job is hard in some way, but what keeps me here, I think, is a sense of vocational calling. So I don't question that I was supposed to be a professor. Don't know if this will sort of like be the rest of my career, but I don't think that I made a mistake in this calling, or that I was disobedient to God in some way. And I think sometimes that does actually give me the space and the distance to kind of be able to see the big picture, as opposed to necessarily majoring in the minors. In terms of my spiritual disciplines, I mean, I think that, it's important for me, just as a Christian, to sort of keep up a daily walk with God, to make sure that, I'm reading my Bible daily and doing those spiritual disciplines. I never thought about it in the context of this public work. But one of the things that I think I am mindful of is this idea of not doing things in my own strength. So, I can do that and mess up, and I certainly have done that before. But I often go back to the, oh Lord, I don't know what I'm getting ready to say, please help me, right? And sort of to think about preparation as well. And so part of that, I think, is an act of humility, but it's also sort of a recognition that I'm doing all things through Christ who strengthens me, right? And the only way that that's going to happen is if I kind of acknowledge that, because I could go on autopilot and the results could end up being something disastrous. So I can't say that I necessarily am sort of conscious about doing that, but as we were sort of praying before the start of this call, like my own private prayer was, oh Lord, please help me, because I have no idea what I'm going to say. And so that and I prayer very, very often. And I think that that's sort of a reminder that I'm not doing this on my own, and I'm not supposed to be doing this on my own.
Maybe we'll go to Pete.
Sure. In terms of the spiritual discipline or practice, I'm not sure. I guess the way that I understand the way I interpreted the question, the way I think about it, is community. I think community is pretty big deal to me. Friendships are a pretty big deal to me. Being surrounded by people whom I love and trust and respect. And I think just in terms of the challenging road and the vocation that I have, just to give you an example, Mark Laberton, president of Fuller Seminary, or Philip Yancey or Francis Collins, people like those people I really admire, to both be in community with them, and again to think through, because I do admire them, what is it that I admire about them, and is there any way I can reflect what it is in my own work to imperfectly mirror sort of who they are, what it is about them that seems to resonate with me, and I think resonate with a lot of other people. So I think that kind of being surrounded, even, Michael and I are part of a Thursday call group, and friendships develop in these things, and just having that kind of those kind of relationships, people you can turn to one-on-one or in a group, or having a lunch. I think that's that's been helpful to me. I don't pretend to be any model on other spiritual disciplines, and I'm not sure, quite honestly, reading the Bible, I don't know how that would affect. I mean, my faith, I think, is so central to who I am. I've thought before, if I were to try and think through how do I view life without my faith, it'd be like if you'd said you drop dye into a glass of water. I mean, it doesn't segregate itself. It's like everything is sort of tinted to one degree or another, and so it's hard to untangle that. In terms of joy in the public square, I mean, I alluded to it earlier. I think on those rare occasions where one is able to imperfectly impart something about Jesus, mostly his love, I would say, to others, that in a broken world, there's someone you can point to, something that's said that can lead a little bit more healing, a little bit more understanding. I think that brings an enormous amount of joy or satisfaction. Just like if you miss it, it can bring real sadness. But if you feel like you've been able to mirror that in some imperfect way, that's meaningful.
Michael, last
Yeah.
word.
I think silence and solitude are just essential disciplines in a culture and in an environment in which the public increasingly encroaches on our lives, every single one of us. And then for those of us who are public facing in some way, those of us who are interacting with strangers on a regular basis, silence and solitude help you to let go of thinking that your value is in the opinions that you have or in how people react to you, in the validation you receive from others. I find that with elected officials, I know they are just so incredibly first sort of shocked and paranoid, and then incredibly relieved if they discover that you're going to treat them as if they have a soul. They are just so used to being treated as though they are ciphers.
So it's Friday
And
night.
silence and solitude can be a big piece of coming to an understanding that you have a soul. I'd also say, anonymous service or giving, I think, is especially helpful right now, when so much of sort of the impulse to compassion or the impulse to justice is tied in a way that's very hard to disentangle from the performative aspects of it. To have the discipline of service with in a way that's anonymous, I think, is another way of sort of locating your validation and your motivations in a helpful way. I love the question of joy. For the last 7-8 years, as I've been sort of talking with folks and doing events, I'd read to them Dallas Willard's definition of joy, which is a pervasive and constant sense of well-being. That's how Dallas would define joy. And I ask people at my events, how many of you would say that our politics is full of a pervasive and constant sense of well-being? And it's a complete laugh line. But I try to remind them that we need to think about why that is the case. We need to think about why, when we think about the public, the security in which we at least hope to find in Christ somehow gets rationalized away, or we just simply can't find it. And if that's your position, that's a difficult place to be, and something that deserves care and prayer and compassion. But we really need to think why we think Jesus's love and care extends to the personal parts of our lives and not to our public life, and really explore that and see what we might find if we think about those things explicitly.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate how you three have all shared from your lives, speaking the truth in love. And so I'm just going to, we're a little bit over, but I want to make a couple announcements and then close this in a prayer. We are almost all the way through. We got a week and a half left or so of the Via Divina, and we have a couple more webinars that will be happening. In particular, next week, we'll be having one on creation care and a liturgy of joy. And then, of course, at the very end, we will have a closing ceremony. For those who have not yet signed up for the Franciscan Way, there's still time. These are 5 audio guides where you can walk and listen and be led in the life of Francis in prayer. It's a way to do solitude and silence while you're walking. And I actually usually do it with my husband, so not always alone, but a way to be in the very present with Jesus and learning. Let me close with a prayer from St. Francis that feels applicable. Lord, make me an instrument of your peace. Where there is hatred, let me sow love. Where there is injury, pardon. Where there is doubt, faith. Where there is despair, hope. Where there is darkness, light. And where there is sadness, joy. O divine Master, grant that I may not so much seek to be consoled as to console, to be understood as to understand, to be loved as to love. For it is in giving that we receive, it is in pardoning that we are pardoned, and it is in dying that we are born to eternal life. Amen. Thanks so much for being here. It's great to see you all, and may God bless you as you keep on journeying down the Franciscan Way in this summer that's very hot.